How many of you know someone who has been in the service? How many of you know what selective service is? The Selective Service System is a government agency that keeps information on people subject to military conscription, also known as the draft. Although we've been an all-volunteer force since 1973, the Selective Service System website states that the law requires all male U.S. citizens and male immigrants to register for the draft within 30 days of their 18th birthday. First, I'd like to inform you of its history. The history of the draft in the U.S. travels all the way back to the Revolutionary War and has been involved in the Civil War, both World Wars, the Korean War, and the war in Vietnam. According to the History Channel's website, the Selective Service Act was signed into effect by President Wilson in 1917 in preparation for World War I, registering roughly 24 million and ultimately drafting 2.8 million men. In 1940, Congress imposed its first peacetime draft in preparation for possibly going into World War II. And the last draft in the United States ended in 1973, towards the end of the Vietnam War. And we have been an all-volunteer force ever since. But over time, there has been much resistance to the draft due to the argument of an unfair selection system and the opposition of war, Vietnam being the most famous. When the draft was enacted during the Civil War, the wealthy could either hire someone to take their place or pay a $300 draft exemption fee. Aside from this led to the 1863 New York draft riots, resulting in 119 deaths. The riots were orchestrated by poor, low-income Irish immigrants. Aside from economic equality, there were many people that just generally opposed the war. In fact, during the Vietnam War, nearly 210,000 men were charged with draft evasion. So you might be asking yourself, what would it look like if we were to return to the draft? Michael Horowitz, with a PhD in government from Harvard, says that America's current volunteer military force satisfies its military requirements. However, in case of major conflict, it could call on those registered in the Selective Service to a draft. According to the Selective Service website, the draft must be authorized by Congress and the President in case of national crisis. The draft would then be in consideration for the enactment once it has been determined that the volunteer force would not suffice. In addition, a birth date-based lottery would determine the order of when a man would be selected. The order of a man to be drafted first would be in chronological order, with 20-year-olds being first. Then inductees would have a 10-day report period to a military entrance processing station for mental, physical, and moral evaluation. The evaluation must be completed in time for the first inductees to be delivered to the military within 193 days of when the crisis occurred. As stated previously, all male citizens and immigrants must register for selective service within 30 days of their 18th birthday. However, there has been recent debate on whether the women should be included. Current law prohibits American women from registering with Selective Service because they are not subject to the draft. In a National Defense Magazine article, retired Colonel Rachel McCaffrey argues women have served effectively in every American conflict and should be exposed to the same responsibilities of service as their fellow male citizens. As stated by Ellen Mitchell in the Hill newspaper, District Judge Gray Miller declared the current system unconstitutional earlier this year. The court ruled with women being able to work in combat roles, the male-only draft is unconstitutional. But President Trump's administration appealed this ruling in favor of a male-only draft. So, as it stands, only men can currently register for the Selective Service. In conclusion, the Selective Service is an integral part of America, whether we like it or not. The military draft has been implemented multiple times over history and inarguably has the potential to happen again. Although many may still disagree with its process, its purpose still stands to ensure a sufficient military for the country's national security in case of a major conflict, or at least until we come up with a more approachable plan.